I met Anna here at CCS in my office a few years back, she went directly to my inspirational wall and started looking at the images, started talking about the books. We were talking about Diaghilev, the Ballet Russe impresario, Bob Rummel, Leon Bakst, Fortuny, etc. I immediately knew we spoke the same language, the language of fashion and the language of fashion research. Her knowledge of fashion history was biblical in proportion. I was secretly hoping she could teach for us one day. Anna Sui is one of the most important names that has come out of the Detroit region, certainly the most prolific fashion designer. She has worked in the industry already for 10 years before launching her first catwalk show in 1991. Anna Sui has been presented with such prestigious awards as the Council of Fashion Designers of America Perry Ellis Award. She was named one of the top 5 fashion icons of the decade and earned the Geoffrey Bean Lifetime Achievement Award, joining the ranks of Yves Saint Laurent, Giorgio Armani, Ralph Lauren, and Diane von Furstenberg. Today, Anna Sui has over 50 boutiques in 8 countries, and her collections and products are sold in 300 stores in over 30 countries. She is the only fashion designer that I know of that both Tim Blanks and Andrew Bolton have written a book about, a true accolade to her talent. She is a treasure trove of wonderful stories, so I cannot wait to sit down and share some of them with you. Dear audience, I'm honored to welcome iconic American designer Anna Sui to CCS and the Toyota Lecture Series.
To be here in my hometown. Thank you all for coming to hear my stories. I hope you enjoyed this
evening. Thank you. Okay, so welcome home.
Thank you. It's
Amazing.
Great to be here.
Yeah. So I wanted to start the conversation with the youth, the past. The starting point. You're from Detroit region, originally from...
I was born in Detroit. I grew up in Dearborn Heights,
yeah.
And then in high school we moved to West Bloomfield.
Oh, wonderful. So I have these 3 flyers and posters up here. Can you talk to me about the first sort of moments you went to concerts or you couldn't go to the concert?
Yes,
yeah.
Okay. I heard about the Grandy Ballroom. I fantasized about it, and I knew a senior in school that went there, and I would always ask him, can you bring me one of those flyers? And actually in my last show, the video that was showing before, I asked 2 of the famous psychedelic artists if we could use their imagery. And I think, is Laura Grimshaw here? She actually came to the show and brought some beautiful posters, and I got to use her husband's beautiful imagery, and also Carl Lundgren. It was kind of a dream come true because these were my heroes. I loved everything about the posters, the drawings, the color, the calligraphy. And to actually meet Laura and hear about Gary's process, and she showed me some personal things about him, and it's just fascinating. So that's part of my process, is that I like to learn about the things I'm obsessed with.
Wonderful. So what was the first sort of idea of that you love fashion, you want to be a fashion designer? How early into your childhood can you go?
I went to New York for the first time when I was 4 years old to be a flower girl at my aunt and uncle's wedding. And I came back saying to my parents, when I grow up, I'm going to move to New York and I'm going to be a fashion designer. I spent the rest of my childhood figuring out how to do that. And I didn't know how to do it, except that my babysitter had 17 magazine, and in the back there was an ad for Parsons School of Design. And at the same time, every household back then got Life magazine weekly. And there was an article about 2 young ladies that went to Parsons School of Design, and when they graduated, they moved to Paris, and Elizabeth Taylor opened a boutique for them. So I thought, okay, all I have to do is go to Parsons.
Easy.
And that was my focus. So I wrote to them, I got the registration catalog, and I really geared my whole curriculum so that I could have that portfolio and that grade point average and everything I needed to get into Parsons.
So you moved to New York eventually, you go to Parsons, and you start exploring the club life side of New York, the culture, the punks. Can you tell me a little bit about those kind of iconic moments?
Yeah, I mean, 70s New York, there was such an underground there. We were in a big economic slump. Rents were very low. There was so much creativity. And out of like all the clubs that I went to, like CBGB's and Max's and the Mud Club, you evolved people like Jim Jarmusch and the Talking Heads, the Ramones. And these were people that you would see every night. Like all you had to do was just kind of club hop and you would see all these people, Blondie, and you'd see some of your heroes too, like Iggy Pop and Andy Warhol. And it was just kind of, that was the nightlife then. And a fascinating time and so inspiring because no one had any money, but everyone looked great. Like we were all thrift shopping and dressing like movie stars. And it was just kind of a whole fantasy that we all had. We all went to New York probably to meet Andy Warhol and probably to live out our fantasies.
Yeah, that's they say that, what did they say, that don't always meet your heroes because you don't know how they're going to be really turn out. So there's a lot of, you mentioned quite often Marc Jacob, Meisel, so were these part of the same kind of a scene?
My first close friend that I met at Parsons School of Design was Stephen Meisel. And the first thing he said with me is, get rid of your boyfriend and come out clubbing with us. So that we started clubbing and going out. We figured out how to get into the clubs early, before 9 o'clock. You didn't have to pay. So then that made it affordable for us to go out at night. So we'd be the first people at the club, and then all of a sudden we'd start seeing Valentino and Jackie Onassis. And it was incredible who was going out to all these clubs at that point.
So you worked in the industry. I mentioned earlier that you had worked in the industry for 10 years before you actually launched your collection. So what did you do during those 10 years?
Well, I started out working for a big company. Actually, I got hired before I graduated from Parsons, which is a good thing because I didn't do my homework. And I was lucky to get a job. I overheard two seniors talking about this job, and it was somebody that I really loved, that I had read about in some underground magazines. A woman named Erica Elias, and she had a collection called Charlie's Girls. And so I ran up there with my student portfolio and I got the job. And I really learned so much from her. She was a very tough boss. If you were talking, you weren't working. And if she wanted a gingham, you had to present every gingham available. You could not just show her one. And it was just, I think with that training, it kind of opened doors for me throughout my career.
Are you a boss like that now?
I don't think I'm quite as demanding.
Okay. So if you go to the next slide, I wanted to talk about this sort of catalyst in your career. Can you tell us Ritz Hotel story with a fellow Michigander and what happened?
I'd never gone to see the shows in Paris, and my friend Stephen Meisel said to me, why don't you come to Paris with me this time? We'll go to the shows. And I thought, okay, let me do this. Like I just never dreamed that I could, but going with Stephen, of course, you could see every show imaginable. So the first stop, we were on our way to the Gaultier show, and we stopped at the Ritz, and we picked up Madonna. But before we got in the car, we went up to her room, and I walked in her room, and it was filled with racks and shopping bags from every designer in Paris, just like throwing things at her. And it was just, I was so jealous, like, oh my God, look, all that Chanel that she has. And so she was in her dressing room. When she came out, she had her coat on, and we jump in the car, go through this chaotic entrance at the show, and we're seated, and right when she sat down, she took off her coat. She said, "Anna, I have a surprise for you," and she was wearing my dress. And that was one of the things that gave me the confidence, because when we got back to New York, Stephen said, "Okay, it's your turn. You have to do a show." And I was like, how can I do a show? How do I compete against Chanel, Versace? These were the designers at that moment. He said, "We'll help you." And I think that confidence came from, here was Madonna, who could have anything, and she wore my dress.
Wonderful story. And here's a picture of the
That's
actual
the dress, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the dress.
Beautiful.
And she's got my jewelry on. She borrowed it for the picture.
Oh, fantastic. So then you went back to New York, 1991, and you put on your first show, and we have a picture of the iconic Linda Evangelista, and then the next one is Naomi Campbell. So can you, like, how did you pull this all together? I mean, these are like major names.
Well, going back to the two young ladies that graduated from Parsons and went to Paris, and Elizabeth Taylor opened a boutique for them. I, as a kid, only looked at the pictures and the captions. As an adult, I went back and reread the article, and one of the young ladies' father was the legendary Irving Penn. And as a kid, you don't understand, like, there's certain connections, there's certain things that help. I think I had Stephen Meisel as my best friend, and I knew Linda and Naomi socially. They would always hang out at my apartment. We would go out together. So when it came time to doing the show, they helped me get all the other models.
Amazing. So how was just in general, I mean, putting a show together, it's a colossally complicated situation. Was it as difficult 1991 as it is today, or like, how was it, and what are the differences between then and now?
I was very fortunate. Somebody got me a free space. It was very low budgeted, but I was fortunate to get all the top models because they were all friends. And actually the summer before, Linda had worn my dresses during the couture fittings, and suddenly I got all these phone calls from a lot of the other models wanting those dresses, because I think this was the first time in their career that they saw clothes that were something they related to. Like, it was starting to change them, like all this power dressing and big shoulder, like power suits. Suddenly they saw these pretty little lace dresses and baby doll dresses, and they were attracted to it. So suddenly all these models were calling and getting my clothes. So I think that it was a smaller community of people, and it was just kind of a magical time, and I was lucky to be there at that moment.
And how is the show production today? I've
Out
been
of
to your
control.
show. It is like incredibly impressive.
It's out of control. It's shows got so big and production got so big, and you know, we did this in a empty showroom, which was I don't even, like maybe a third of the space. You know, it was a small space, and you kind of knew every photographer that would come. You knew all the press people. It was a much smaller community back then.
Yeah.
And I think once globalization happened, the New York Fashion Week became this huge thing with lots of foreign press and foreign photographers, and it exploded.
So we have a great picture of the powerful models with this the baby doll. Look, can you tell us about the accessories, because you know we are heavily involved in the accessories design business.
The birthday cake bags. There was a bakery right by my office called the Cupcake Cafe, and I just loved the way she made frosting on the cakes. So I thought, why don't I get her to make plaster ones for the handbags, since they have these birthday party outfits on. The jewelry is by Karen Erickson, who's a Detroiter, Erickson Beeman is her company, and from the very first show, she made jewelry for my show. And this was at the moment of grunge, with all the grunge girls wearing kind of baby doll dresses and tiaras. So we just had to do the best ones we could possibly dream up. And James Coviello made the feather creations that are mixed in with that. And actually, these have been photographed for the Met catalog for the new show that's about to open. And it's, I hope that people get to see it.
The camp one.
The camp one,
Yeah,
yes.
great. Fantastic. So let's talk about music. You mentioned grunge, and I've been just really dying to dive further into the sort of musical inspirations that you have for your collections. And I read a really fun, maybe, story about Sid Vicious and how you met him. And I was like, what? You met Sid Vicious? So how did this whole, and Nancy Sponge, so how did this whole situation evolve? And
well, I was always the type of person that if something was happening, I wanted to see it firsthand, be there. And there was this whole moment of punk going on in London. And I had experienced the New York punk scene, which happened first. And from one of Stephen's best friends, Richard Soule, was in Patti Smith's band. So we first started going to see her reciting poetry and seeing her perform, and then CBGB's evolved, and the Max's became like a punk scene. So I knew what it was like in New York, but the London one was just getting so much press. So I went there for the first time, and my friend Kate Simon, who was she did like the album cover for The Clash and for the Ramones. She said, I'm going to London, you should meet me there. And I was like, well, where do you stay? And so she told me which hotel. So I went, she never showed up. But the first morning, I was coming out because I was going shopping, and the door across the hall opened, and I see Sid Vicious, and I was like, and he was like worse for wear, and throwing his tray out on outside for them to pick up, and you could see his room was a wreck. And then that evening I went to see some bands, I think the Buzzcocks, and I was with my friend Walter Lure, who was in the Heartbreakers, and I got introduced to Sid and Nancy. And I said, oh my God, I think you're staying at my hotel. So the next day I get a phone call from Sidney Fisher. And I thought, who's Sidney Fisher? And the guy had gotten it wrong at the hotel, and Sid wanted me to come hang out with them. But I knew what that meant. They probably needed money to get high, and they thought maybe I was gonna help them with it. But I didn't really do drugs, so it was just kind of like I thought, well, I'm gonna go along just to see what happens. So I went to their hotel room, and it was pretty abysmal, and we were there for a long time, and I said, I thought we were going out. And so, like, I convinced them, like, let's go out and have a drink. So the only place he had a credit was the Speakeasy Club. So we go there. Nancy doesn't come in with us because she's going to see the man. And so Sid and I go into the Speakeasy, but I had to go in first to see if Paul Weller was there.
Really?
Yeah, because he had gotten into a fight with Paul Weller a couple nights before and threw a glass at him. So I had to scope out the place, make sure Paul Weller wasn't there. So we go in and sit down, and I said, well, now buy me a drink. And he said, I haven't got any money. And I said, then use your charm. And so he ended up chatting up these girls, and we got drinks.
Oh, a great story. So let's go on to the next slide, because I also wanted to talk about a little bit about your business model. And in the following slide, we have a Barbara Hulanicki.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Biba. And Biba, of course, is known for the fact that they introduced affordable fashion for the younger generation of women in England in the 60s. So I read that you also have similar kind of a philosophy with your collections.
Yeah, she's always been one of my idols. I started my collection wanting everything to be very affordable, the way she did. And when we would come to New York every summer, I remember that Bergdorf Goodman's had Biba at BG, and they had a miniature Biba department. So I saw the cosmetics for the first time with the black packaging and the Art Deco makeup counters, and then all her incredible colors of teal and plum, and just colors you'd never seen before. And I just thought she was the most amazing designer ever. So that was always in the back of my mind, that I want my own cosmetics line. I want to be able to kind of create this world. And one of my first bosses had gone to the Biba store and gave me like the catalog from the first store, and that was kind of like my Bible. Like, this is a vision that I want to follow.
And have you met her?
Yes, I'm actually really good friends with her now.
Oh, she's really...
Yeah, I met her in London, and we stay in touch, yeah.
Oh, great. So, I bought something from you. Unfortunately, it didn't arrive on time. I'm sorry. I wanted to wear it as a little scarf, as a bow tie. But I noticed that, are all of your things made in New York, or?
As much as we can make in New York is what we do. Unfortunately, we've lost all the sweater mills now, so we have to make sweaters in China. Embroidery is impossible to do, so a lot of that's done in India. But the actual garments we make in New York.
Okay. So what's your sort of point of view about that? I mean, I know you've been a sort of a spokesperson for Saving the Garment District, and...
Well, my whole career has been in the garment district, from my first job on, and actually in the same like 2-3 block area. And when you look at my book and you see those first collections, every fabric was made in America and sewn in New York. And it was kind of sad when I was working on the book and my exhibition that was in London, and seeing that a lot of these companies were gone, all the industry has gone offshore. And so about 6 or 7 years ago, one of my contractors came to me and said, you know, I think we're going to have to go out of business. We can't get our landlord to renew our lease. And you know, I asked, you know, well, what happened? And they said, well, you know, they can get better money from tech companies. And so I thought, well, I've got to do something about this. So I got involved with the Save the Garment Center group, and we've been petitioning over and over again to save at least an area where this industry can survive. I mean, it was such a vital part of New York, and it's just dwindled down to just a few blocks, where it used to be like 10 blocks and 10 square blocks, yeah.
And it, of course, has got a ripple-down effect. So the button representatives are no longer there, and the zipper and the yarn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know if you had a chance to hear a few words from our previous symposium talk about bringing fashion manufacturing back to Detroit. So when we do so, I'm not saying if, I say when we do so, I really hope that you will be one of our clients in the future.
I hope so, yes.
So you will be. So let's go to the next slide and talk about this wonderful show that I had a chance to witness firsthand. And my impression was exactly about this massive production of putting a show together. So just for the sake of the audience and also for my students, like where does it start? Like, can you walk through?
Yeah, I mean, you're crazy for about 6 months working on a show. First, you need that like lightning to strike you, that you need an idea, a concept, something to work behind. So what I do is I build an inspiration board in my office, and it's broken down by 4 boards because it represents 4 different deliveries, which is how our business works. And I have a color story for each delivery, and then we start with, well, I first start collecting images that I love, but I group it by color, so I start creating a color story for the collection. And from that, we start creating fabrics, prints, and surprisingly enough, the first thing you have to do are the shoes, because that's the longest process. So you have to create shoes before you even know what the clothes are going to look like. And you kind of just pray that it's all going to work together at the end. So a lot of times you have to trust your instincts, because there's moments when you just think like, what have I created? This is crazy. Like, how is this going to match this? but you just kind of work through it. And it's really, you have to realize it's a process. And as long as you move it forward, you'll get there. And I think that it never got easier. It's always a challenge. And then there's always things that go wrong.
So you said that you are 6 months crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that you're crazy all the time. Because 6 months to one season and then the other season.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
We actually had one of our wonderful adjuncts at the show in the next slide, Andy Espinosa, who illustrated
yes.
the previous show, and it was really, really
Love,
great
yeah,
event.
love the drawings.
So how many do you do autumn? You do autumn, winter,
Yeah, I do 2 shows a year. Some
Two shows.
designers do 3.
but how many deliveries?
We do every month, so there's 12 deliveries. So we do a resort collection in between, but it's not a fashion show.
Okay.
Yeah. So every collection is 4 months.
Okay. Yeah, that is 12 months of craziness there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's move on. So let's talk about muses. So the first image that I put here is somebody that I absolutely adore. Is Luisa Casati.
Mm-hmm.
And I read that your first home was decorated in this sort of very dark goth environment.
Yes. My first apartment was a railroad apartment. And the kitchen, which was the first room, was Kelly green and leopard. The second room was all red, floor, ceilings, walls. And then the rest of it was black. And I even painted the windows black, put black lace curtains. So, yeah.
And the next slide we have, I talked to you about this earlier, Martin Sibon wrote a really beautiful, poetic story of afternoon in Portobello Road with you, and you talked about the other sort of muse that came to your muses as well, or were before this actually. So we have a picture of Marianne Faithfull, I believe, yes.
Yeah, I used to go to London a lot, and every time I went to London, I would call Martine, because she was just like a hop, skip, and a jump away. So I'd say, let's meet up in London, and let's go to Portobello and see exhibitions and things. And so during the course of time, I got to be really good friends with Anita Pallenberg, and then we met Marianne Faithfull. So there would be weekends where, like starting first thing in the morning, we would go to Portobello Road, and actually one time Marc Jacobs was with us too. And it was Martine, Marc, Anita, and I went to Portobello. And then there were other vintage stores that I had to go to. And then it was like, well, when are we gonna eat lunch? And I'm like, after we finish the stores, we can eat lunch. I mean, you're not starving, are you? And they were like, well, we could take a break. But I was just like, that was the way I was, like, just had to go see what the latest and what these vintage stores had. And after the end of this whole day of shopping, we kind of showed each other what we bought, because we were so, off on our own, like kind of buying things. And then we kind of all got sort of mod things that time, that shopping trip. So then we decided we were all gonna do mod collections. So that was, I think it was 96, but I could be wrong on the date, but it's the show that opened with Linda Evangelista on the Vespa.
I think it's 1995.
95.
I'm sorry, I'm telling you.
Yeah. I don't remember dates.
Yeah.
And if you look back, Marc did a mod collection, and
Yeah.
so did Martine. Yeah, and
Great.
that was from the shopping trip.
We actually have a picture of Anita Pallenberg. They're really sort of iconic image, an iconic person from that era. So moving on, obsession. One of my early memories of, not early, but one of my sort of really strong memories of your work comes from this photographer who photographed a Japanese photographer. I'm sure they all brought her joy. What's the name of that woman who says, like, "Don't throw your clothes away if they don't bring you joy"? Marie Kondo. Just like her, not her house. But so the photographer took these pictures of people who are obsessed with fashion, and this young lady is obsessed with Anna Sui. So you mentioned the word obsession a lot. So tell us more.
Well, I guess I'm a very obsessive person. Like the way I had to go to London to see the punk bands in person, and not only see them but meet them, and just like that's kind of my personality. I think that's what you'll see collection after collection, is that I'm lucky that I have the best job in the world. I can put anything I'm obsessed with into my work, which gives me even more reason to be obsessed about it and do more research about it and to experience more about it. And then there was one vintage dealer that used to say, well, you're such a show-off too. And I guess that show-off thing is that once I see something, I want everybody else to know about it. So that's why like having a show is like the perfect vehicle for that type of personality that I have.
But you like to share. That's a good trait. So then I believe we have a picture of one of the spreads from the book. And I always tell my students that research is so important. It's the starting point of your collection. It's the starting point of your ideas. There's so many things you can pull from history, from now, or you can just create your futures through images of contemporary art or mood, etc. So you already mentioned about your boards. So how important part of this is?
Well, it's so important for me because it transports me to that place that I'm trying to get to for the collection. And I put up images like paintings or clippings from magazines or a still from a movie. And that's the way that it helps me stay focused, because I could go off into a million different directions. But this way I keep looking at the inspiration board and thinking, okay, what is it that's giving you that thrill? And I try to draw from that. And it also gives the information to my staff. And also I have many licenses, so they come in and see the board too. So they can kind of understand the thought process from these images, the color story that they tell, and what the emotion and style I'm trying to evoke. So it's a form of communication for me.
So it also works in merchandising, in store ideas for your clients. So Anna Sui, the Empire, you mentioned licenses. So what are all the categories that you do?
Well, I have a license in Japan that is distributed through a department store, Isetan. And along with that distribution, I got 14 different licenses behind it. And one of them was the cosmetics. And there we do kimonos and fans and stockings and handbags, children's wear, hats, scarves. So I think that I have to say that the success of my business has been the licenses. But at the same time, when I got approached by that, I got approached by a fragrance company, the German company Wella, that did my first perfumes. And my idea was to get Wella and Albion to cross-distribute so that we could sell Europe and Asia and the United States. And they said, that's unheard of. Like, nobody does that cross-distribution. But that was the beginning of globalization. And so it's something that worked for us.
Okay. So perfumes, that's very interesting. Are you actively involved in creating the perfume? Or?
Yes.
Okay. So you have a new one, the Mermaid.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
One. Okay.
Yeah. That's evolved out of the Fantasia, which has the unicorn.
Yeah.
And so what every fragrance represents for me is an aspect of my design. And a lot of times it was aspirational, like sweet love, sweet dreams. But now we're actually drawing on inspirations like fairy tales. And so that's where this whole Fantasia brand came from.
Wonderful. So let's move to the next slide. I wanted to talk about a little bit about the vision, and if you go to the following image, I put this picture here from the 1995 Autumn-Winter collection because it's a sort of a capture, this research you were talking about, the mods and yet it has a very much of a Bowie-esque hairdo. I can see David Sylvian. I can see so many elements in this, and what really threw me, like really blows me away is the fact that it's 1995, because if you look at Hedi Slimane's collections, 10 years later, if you look at his collections for Celine, for example, this could easily be, so you very much had a sort of a vision of what the fashion... Androgyny, that's the exact word I was coming to. So you saw our students' work, you saw the wonderful people that we had in our department today, and this sort of a gender fluid idea is very much becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. So do you have any points of view about that? Or?
Well, I mean, I think since day one, when I was creating collections and I started adding men, the looks were very androgynous. And I did men's clothing for many, many years. The only problem was I didn't really sell them, so there was no point to keep doing them. But I think if you look throughout my collections, because we had to use the same fabrics, and we made clothes in my studio, I didn't have the tailoring facilities, although this is pretty tailored for us. So it was partly out of necessity, but also, I grew up loving glam rock and Bowie and T-Rex and Alice Cooper. Alice Cooper was one of the first bands I saw in Detroit.
Incredible. So, what does the future hold for Anna Sui? You have an exhibition coming up.
I do.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, my exhibition opened in London at the Fashion and Textile Museum 2 years ago, and it's called The World of Anna Sui, and it really embodies not just chronologically my design, but also all the concepts, the inspirations, and the fact that I worked with kind of the same team throughout the whole time I've been doing shows, like Erickson Beeman for jewelry, James Coviello for sweaters and hats, Erickson Beeman for jewelry, Garin for hair, Francois Nars, and then Pat McGrath for makeup. And then my friend Stephen Meisel sees every Polaroid, goes through the list of models. It's like, it's a team, it's a family. And my friend Bill Mullen is always in there helping me as I'm doing the styling and putting the outfits together and reminding me of my original concept over and over again. So I think that I've been really fortunate that I have this team, this family, but also I wanted young designers to understand that just because there's one name on the label doesn't mean it's one person creating. You depend on your team, you need that. And it's part of what makes a brand. It's not just one person.
You did a wonderful dedication to your team on your Instagram account, going through each of the individuals that were part of that. Have you ever been interested in cinema and clothing for cinema?
Yeah, I would love to do a movie or a theater, but I haven't been asked.
Hopefully that will come. Okay, well, is there some kind of what's your advice for students? I mean, you had a chance to pretty much see most of our students' work. Very, bright eyes, hopeful, excited about the future.
Yeah, I think that, the way I tell my story about finding the magic key, but I think you can also hear that you need that determination, that focus. I mean, I've had it since I was 4 years old. It's the only thing I thought about. The only thing I wanted was to be a fashion designer. It was never like, oh, maybe I'm gonna become a scientist and then a fashion designer. It's like, I wanted to be a fashion designer. And I did everything possible in my education and to make it happen. And I did everything possible to support it by doing 7 years of freelance back and forth between Italy and New York, just so I could have money to keep my business going. And I think that a designer has to realize that the competition is so huge now. I mean, design schools graduate hundreds of students every year, where back when I went to school, maybe the graduating class was 30 to 50. Now there's so many more design schools and so many more students and fewer jobs.
Yeah.
And that's the big difference. I mean, when I started, New York was a thriving industry. I think it was millions of employees. Now it's maybe down to like less than 1 million, maybe a couple 100,000. So where are all those students going to get jobs?
Well, this is why we did the accessory school, because it's
Yeah.
a scenario other way around that. There's not very many schools who do that. And that's a very, very, very good point. So thank you so much. This has been really wonderful
Thank
to talk
you.
to you, but we're going to open the floor for questions, because
Sure.
certainly I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions.
Sure.
I didn't hear the end part.
Well, basically, what would you do differently? Is there anything that you would do differently today?
Correct.
I would learn how to do Photoshop.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair.
I wish I knew how to do it, yeah. I mean, I think it's amazing.
Hi, so my name is Fernando Gutierrez. My question is simply, how do you see the future of luxury changing in the digital age?
It's been a challenge for me because I'm old school, and I really, like, the way I learned how to design clothes, I really need to see it step by step. See how the muslin comes out on the mannequin, see how the fabric drapes when you make it up, see how it looks on a body. And now a lot of designing is done with tech packs and digitally. And it's a challenge for me to understand that, because I only see what's not accurate in a digital creation. And maybe that's my old way of thinking, but it's, I don't know. I really think you need to work in the medium that is the end result and not, but I think it's amazing that people can do it. So if I had a different training, maybe it would come easier to me.
Hello, Anna. My name is Adriel. I have a couple of questions actually. This is kind of two-part. But one is, you were arguably inspired by Detroit, and especially the music coming out of the city in your formative years. Is there anything about Detroit that is still inspiring to you? And two, are you still as inspired by music? And if so, what are you listening to these days?
The video that was playing before, you can see that there's a huge Motown influence. I was thinking about that music, and you can see it in the styling and the hairdos, everything. I was looking at like film footage of all the Motown bands, the Supremes and Marvelettes, and then I decided I wanted to use that music in my show. And I didn't realize it was the 60th anniversary this year too. And so I learned that like a few days before the show, that's, so behind almost every collection, there's always like a trail of music that I'm also incorporating, because it's not just the fabric and the colors. There's also a mood you're trying to create, especially when you do a fashion show. I want to transport the audience to that same journey that I'm mentally going through, and the music helps you so much, and it carries you there.
Hi, Anna. Welcome home. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
So you were talking about your brainstorming in your creative process. Can you speak a little bit about the space where you know you're being triggered, where you know your creativity and your inspiration? When you know you're being inspired, are you like cognizant of those moments? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes and no, because sometimes you have no idea why you're going in this direction, and again, that's when you have to trust yourself and work through it. And sometimes it's wrong. Sometimes you have to abandon it and go a different path. But that's part of the process. And that's the thing that I always tell myself, especially, a month before the show, there's no clothes. And I hate when people come up and say, "How's the collection?" And you're like, "What collection?" So that's the worst possible moment, like the month before the show. But then the thing you have to understand is every day after that it gets better, because you're only just getting the fabrics. And that's the other thing, all of a sudden you have this room full of fabrics, and then you think like, oh my God, what am I gonna do with this? And again, you have to trust yourself, and you start little by little and just work through it.
Hello, I have a question, a business question. Since you're either making it or selling it, those are the only jobs in the world, I'm asking you what division of your business drives the majority of your retail sales?
Sure, I made you that one word there.
What part of the business is the majority of the
Retail
revenue?
sales.
Yeah, is it cosmetics or clothing?
Okay, I think if you think about Chanel, what makes the money? The perfume. So it's kind of like, that's the prize for a brand, is if you can have those products that can support the creative part.
So are you saying your fragrances is really what's the moneymaker for you?
It's what helps.
Yeah.
All the licenses help. You know, like making a fashion show, making a collection, it's hard to make money on that. And you spend so much in development, and so much is wasted because you sample certain fabrics, you don't end up using them. So it's really hard to make that the money-making part of your business. So you need a commercial part. And some people have it with, you know, Calvin Klein underwear or Ralph Lauren jeans. You know, I've been lucky to have these variety of licenses that have helped me get through all this. So,
And putting on a show must be quite a
yeah, it's a fortune.
quite a fortune. Yeah.
Mhm.
So we have time for one more question.
Hello. So
Hi.
hi, I'm Amanda. I had a question about when you're going through your process of creating your collection, where is it that you draw the line of editing? Like, does it have to do with manufacturing? Maybe there's not enough time to create a certain item, or is it possibly the process is just taking too long as to what it is that needs to be done? I'm just curious as to how that looks for you.
You know, it depends on how well you're doing. You know, for many years, I didn't analyze so much. I really just created, and business was booming. And now things are much tougher, and you really have to sit back and analyze and figure out, you know, what did well last season. What do you think will help, you know, move your business forward this season? It's a much more difficult time. I think that I had the luxury of starting when stores had that same kind of mentality too, that they were looking to designers like me for window dressing and like frosting on the cake, where we'll do a special shop for this theme, and we'll have designers like Anna Sui create something for this theme. And that wasn't necessarily what was making the profits for them, but it was bringing the people into the store. I don't know that stores have that sort of luxury anymore, because everything's become corporate and everything's bottom line and everything. I mean, you look at stores now, every store looks the same. Where back when I first started, you know, you couldn't wait to go to Bloomingdale's to see this, and you couldn't wait to go to Bergdorf's to see that, and then Saks had something else. And now it's kind of homogenized. And I think that, you know, you can see that that's happened with every business, you know, from sports to music to the films. Everything has become a big business and corporate.
Anna?
Can I do a question, please?
Sure.
Okay, one last question, then we go.
So segueing into that,
Yeah.
John Barbados has come to Detroit, you know, out of New York, and was an original Detroiter. What about you? When can we see an Anna Sui store in downtown Detroit?
Good question. Good question.
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, right now we only have the one store in New York. So it's something that I have to aspire to, yes.
Thank you so much.